Hello, everyone. Story 1. My name is Gabriel, and for the past 7 months I have been employed in the remote Alaskan outpost of Prudhoe Bay. My journey to this isolated locale was driven by a desire for a profound transformation in my existence, coupled naturally with the pursuit of a substantial income. The demands of working on the extensive pipeline project are formidable. They encompass prolonged shifts, an unyielding, pervasive cold, and the persistent sensation of inhabiting the very fringes of the known world. Yet amidst these rigors, an undeniable allure permeates this environment. There exists an intrinsic grandeur in the immense frozen landscapes that captivates the spirit, a profound tranquility that remains unparalleled anywhere else on Earth. Upon my initial arrival, the local discourse invariably centered on the advent of winter, frequently described as an inevitable trial or a rite of passage for newcomers. The local wisdom cautioned that temperatures could plummet to an astonishing 50 degrees below zero, and the duration of the nights would stretch into an oppressive, endless expanse. What no one articulated, however, was that the most formidable challenge wasn't the bitter cold itself, but rather the malevolent entities that seemed to lurk within that interminable darkness. The operational base comprised a collection of prefabricated modules, serving as both communal dining areas and administrative offices. Initially, my days merged into an indistinct blur, characterized by a repetitive cycle of pipeline inspections, necessary repairs, and rigorous safety evaluations. During my initial weeks, my more seasoned colleagues consistently imparted stern admonitions, cautioning that the vast frigid nights possessed an uncanny ability to deceive the mind and play disorienting tricks upon one's perception. The ice possesses its own unique lexicon, its own method of communication. Roy, a man of stout build and reserved demeanor who had dedicated years to this desolate environment, remarked to me one day. At first, the profound implication of his words eluded my comprehension, but I soon began to discern the phenomena he alluded to. A distinct whistling sound emerged, seemingly emanating from an indiscernible source yet resonating everywhere simultaneously, akin to a mournful lament perpetually ensnared beneath the unyielding frozen crust. "It's merely the wind," I attempted to convince myself, despite an inherent knowing, deep within my consciousness, that the sound bore no resemblance to the natural movement of air. One particular night, while I was diligently inspecting a pumping station, my ears registered an entirely different auditory event. A dry, heavy thud, as if a substantial object had been abruptly dropped onto the ice-covered ground. I immediately ceased my activity and directed the beam of my flashlight across the vast, desolate tundra. The concentrated light ricocheted off the pristine white expanse, yet my gaze met nothing discernible. The unsettling sound recurred, this time palpably closer, and I could have sworn I detected a faint murmur. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice quickly swallowed and dissipated by the relentless wind, but no discernible response was offered in return. I retreated to the relative safety of the camp, shaking my head and rationalizing that my perceptions were merely the product of profound exhaustion. The ensuing weeks passed, and the pervasive weight of the endless nights grew increasingly oppressive. The demands of the night shifts were undeniably debilitating, but what truly sapped my vitality were the ephemeral shadows I would perceive, always just at the periphery of my vision, perpetually beyond the illuminating reach of my flashlight. Initially, I attributed these fleeting apparitions to my mind's inherent tendency to play tricks on me, until one pivotal night when I observed them with undeniable clarity. I was engaged in solitary work, meticulously inspecting a segment of the pipeline that had previously indicated irregular pressure fluctuations. The pipeline gleamed under the focused beam of my flashlight, resembling a colossal metallic serpent that appeared to extend into infinity. I knelt to closely examine a connector, and as I straightened, my gaze landed upon a distinct figure positioned approximately 20 meters distant, standing utterly motionless at the very threshold of the encroaching darkness. "Roy?" I instinctively called out, but the figure remained utterly immobile. I endeavored to precisely focus my flashlight on it, but it seemed to dissipate, dissolving into the frigid air as if it were nothing more than a wisp of smoke. My heart pounded erratically within my chest as I cautiously advanced a few steps closer. Yet upon reaching the precise location where it should have been, there was absolutely nothing. Only the unyielding ice stretched beneath my boots. I returned to the camp in a state of profound trembling, yet I chose to maintain my silence. What viable explanation could I offer? That I had witnessed a shadow dematerialize before my very eyes? I was certain that no one would afford me credibility. The sightings escalated in frequency, characterized by elongated, distorted figures perpetually positioned in the distant expanse, consistently at the periphery of the available light. One particularly unnerving night, from the vantage point of my window, I observed one of these entities moving slowly around the camp. I watched it traverse the ice with an uncanny, impossible gait, as if its form were not actually making contact with the frozen surface whatsoever. It possessed no discernible face, merely a dark, blurred silhouette that appeared to absorb all ambient light within its immediate vicinity. The following day, I recounted my unsettling experience to Roy. He fell silent for a prolonged moment, his gaze fixed intently upon his coffee cup as though perceiving something profound within its depths. "Don't engage them in conversation," was his sole cryptic utterance. "Who?" I inquired, seeking clarification. "Whatever it is that you are perceiving, do not speak to them. Do not pursue them," he reiterated. His response provided no solace. In fact, it served only to amplify my burgeoning anxiety. That very night, summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I armed myself with my camera before commencing my shift. If I were destined to encounter something inexplicable, I was resolved to obtain undeniable proof. I securely affixed the camera to my helmet and initiated my routine patrol as usual. Initially, nothing out of the ordinary transpired. The vast tundra remained quiet, and the only discernible sound was the rhythmic crunch of my boots upon the fresh snow. But then the eerie whistling returned, that mournful lament seemingly emanating from directly beneath the ice. I directed the beam of my flashlight, and there it stood. Another distinct figure, this time closer than I had ever witnessed it before. It did not flee. Instead, it remained stationary, observing me, or at least that was the unsettling impression it conveyed. I retrieved my camera and began to snap a rapid succession of photographs. Then, without conscious deliberation, I uttered the words, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure responded by tilting its head in a manner that instilled in me the profound sensation of being a mouse confronted by a predatory cat. Then, as swiftly as it had appeared, it vanished. The entire event transpired in a fleeting instant. I meticulously reviewed the captured photographs back at the camp, but they were frustratingly blurry. The enigmatic figure was barely discernible as a black blur against a vast, stark white backdrop. Following that disquieting encounter, the phenomena only escalated. The intermittent whistling intensified into distinct knocks, and these knocks in turn transmuted into barely perceptible whispers. My sleep became an elusive luxury, and when I did manage to drift into slumber, my dreams were plagued by visions of shadowy entities attempting to extricate themselves from beneath the frozen ice. Some of my colleagues began to notice my increasing disquietude as well. One morning, Roy confided in me, revealing that years prior he had discovered tracks encircling his module that were undeniably non-human in origin. One night, as I was conducting my final inspection round, a blood-curdling scream pierced the frigid air. It was not the cry of an animal nor the deceptive wail of the wind. It was unmistakably human. I sprinted towards the source of the horrific sound, but what I discovered was nothing more than a distinct crack in the unyielding ice, with something dark and amorphous visibly moving beneath its surface. I slowly retreated, the incessant buzzing in my ears becoming deafening. I could have sworn that a thin, elongated hand attempted to reach out from within the icy fissure. I formally requested a transfer 2 weeks subsequent to that terrifying experience. As I was departing, Roy firmly shook my hand and uttered, "Don't look back, Gabriel, never look back." Even today, far removed from the desolate expanse of Prudhoe Bay, that eerie whistling persists, echoing through my nightmares. Sometimes I contemplate what might have transpired had I chosen to remain. Yet when my gaze meets my reflection in the mirror and I perceive the elusive shadows that appear to shift subtly behind me, I am unequivocally certain that my decision to leave was the correct one. My return home initially brought a sense of peace I believed I had irrevocably forfeited. The vibrant cacophony of the city, the comforting warmth of the sun, and the simple reality of being enveloped by other human beings led me to believe that everything I had endured in Prudhoe Bay had merely been a harrowing nightmare. However, that cherished tranquility proved to be ephemeral. The initial few days of my return were uneventful, but as night descended and the world around me grew hushed, the unsettling sounds began to resurface. They were not identical to those I had heard previously, yet they unmistakably evoked the unsettling memories of my time in Alaska. Deep, resonant sounds, as though the very wind had become a living, breathing entity. Initially, I dismissed these auditory phenomena as mere figments of my imagination, residual echoes of profound stress. However, when I began to hear them during daylight hours, even amidst noisy urban environments, I knew with absolute certainty that this was a phenomenon from which I could not easily escape. Approximately 1 month after my departure from Prudhoe Bay, I resolved to establish contact with Roy. I had meticulously retained his contact number, and despite the inherent absurdity I felt in making the call, I desperately required answers. When he finally answered, his voice conveyed a palpable tension, almost an exhaustion, as though he, too, was grappling with an inexplicable phenomenon. "They're still doing it?" I directly inquired. A prolonged silence ensued, after which he responded, "Yes, they never cease. But they do not draw near, not entirely, they merely observe." "What do they desire?" I pressed, my voice barely a tremor. "I don't know, Gabriel. Nobody knows," he stated. "The sole truth I have ascertained is this. As long as you refrain from opening the threshold, as long as you do not extend an invitation, they are unable to traverse across." "Cross over from where?" I insisted, but Roy abruptly terminated the call without providing an answer. That very night, everything irrevocably shifted. I was seated in my apartment, positioned before my computer, attempting to divert my thoughts by sifting through old work-related photographs. Among the numerous files, I discovered a folder I had no recollection of saving. It was conspicuously dated with the precise day I had concluded my employment in Prudhoe Bay. Upon opening it, I encountered a series of images I had no memory of capturing. They depicted the camp, but in a disturbingly distorted manner, as if they had been deliberately tampered with. The shadows of the figures were strikingly clear, far more sharply defined than I recalled perceiving them in person. In one particular photograph, a distinct shadow stood directly in front of my module's window, its gaze seemingly directed inward. A sharp, insistent knock at my door caused me to jolt violently. It was a sound wholly out of place within the quiet confines of my apartment building. Slowly, my heart pounding erratically within my chest, I rose. I peered through the peephole but discerned no one. However, as I stepped back, the knock recurred, this time originating from the window. My apartment was situated on the 3rd floor. No one could possibly be out there, no one without the aid of a ladder. I cautiously advanced towards the window, gripped by an overwhelming apprehension of what I might encounter. With hands that trembled uncontrollably, I drew back the curtain and beheld it. The very same elongated, distorted shadow I had witnessed in Prudhoe Bay, now suspended eerily in the air. Its limbs extended towards the glass, as if attempting to permeate the barrier. Its eyes were two abyssal black spots that appeared to absorb every vestige of light around them. I staggered backward, inadvertently colliding with a chair. A profound sense of helplessness engulfed me. I was utterly bereft of what action to take. Roy's caution echoed in my mind. "Don't open the door." But in this terrifying instance, there was no door to open. The window began to creak ominously, and a new, unsettling sound permeated the room. A soft, constant whisper, as if a multitude of voices were speaking in unison, too rapidly to discern their individual utterances. It possessed a hypnotic quality, akin to an ancient, enthralling chant that drew me inexorably inward. Abruptly, the glass shattered inward, and a tumultuous gust of icy air inundated the room. I collapsed to the floor, utterly paralyzed, as if the entity were reveling in every agonizing second of my terror. I desperately wished to scream, but my throat remained constricted, as though the very air itself had betrayed my intent. The figure inclined its form towards me, drawing so near that I could perceive an unnatural coldness enveloping my being. Its eyes were fathomless pits, and for a fleeting moment I experienced the disorienting sensation of plummeting into their depths. Then something profoundly shifted. A voice, my own voice, spontaneously emerged from some hidden recess of my mind, declaring, "It doesn't belong to you." The figure paused, as if bewildered by an unforeseen variable. With a sudden, swift movement, it vanished, leaving behind only the lingering frigid air and shards of broken glass scattered across the floor. I did not succumb to sleep that night, nor for the subsequent days. Several days elapsed before I could process my thoughts with any semblance of clarity. But a fundamental change had transpired. I no longer detected the eerie whistling, nor did I perceive the fleeting shadows at the periphery of my vision. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that the ordeal was far from concluded. I once again attempted to contact Roy, but this time he did not respond. When I searched for his name online, I discovered that he had vanished 2 weeks prior. No one possessed any information regarding his whereabouts. Now, many months later, I exist with the persistent intuition that they have, for the moment, released me. But every time my gaze catches a fleeting movement at the edge of my vision, I ponder how much longer I can evade the inevitable. And the most terrifying realization is that I was not the sole individual to experience this phenomenon. There exist others, individuals like Roy, individuals like myself who witnessed what we were never meant to behold. And when the nights extend into their deepest, most profound darkness, I know unequivocally that those enigmatic figures relentlessly seek a means to traverse into our reality. Story 2. I am a seasoned mariner. I have dedicated more hours to navigating the vast expanses of the ocean than to residing on dry land. And I always harbored the conviction that I possessed a comprehensive understanding of the sea's immutable nature. However, there is a profound truth I assimilated during that harrowing tempest in the Gulf of Alaska. Never underestimate its formidable power. Never presume your strength surpasses its own. It was mid-September, precisely before the waters of the Gulf became unduly treacherous for commercial fishing. I had embarked early from the port of Seward aboard my venerable vessel, the Ocean's Whisper, previously Aurora. The meteorological forecast had predicted calm weather conditions, yet anyone who has spent a significant duration in these capricious waters understands that such predictions often hold little bearing. The Gulf of Alaska possesses the inherent capacity to transform in an instant, and on that particular day it did precisely that. The morning hours proved exceptionally productive. The fishing nets were laden with an abundance of cod and halibut, a catch substantial enough to unequivocally justify the extensive voyage. The sky above was a muted gray, yet it offered no discernible indications of an impending storm. However, as noon approached, I detected an unmistakable alteration in the atmospheric conditions. The wind began to noticeably intensify, and the once mirror-like grayish surface of the water commenced to violently churn. I made the executive decision to haul in the nets and initiate my return journey before the situation deteriorated further. My efforts, however, proved insufficient. The storm descended upon us with the ferocity of an unrestrained savage beast, its gusts howling like famished wolves and its colossal waves battering the hull of my vessel like the relentless fists of a giant. The ocean's whisper rocked violently, tossing uncontrollably as I exerted every ounce of my strength to steer her towards the distant coastline. The engine groaned in protest, and each passing second felt like a direct defiance against my very fortune. Then came the catastrophic impact. An immense wave slammed into the boat from its side, capsizing it instantaneously. My efforts were rendered futile. The ocean's whisper collided with an unseen obstruction, perhaps a submerged rock formation or an uncharted coral reef. The jarring impact propelled me violently to the deck, and the subsequent sensation I registered was that of being plunged into the frigid water, desperately clinging to a solitary piece of floating wreckage as my boat rapidly succumbed to the depths. The precise duration that elapsed before I discerned the faint outline of the island remains unknown to me. It manifested as a dark, indistinct shadow against the tumultuous, storm-ravaged horizon, a beacon of hope I could not disregard. I propelled myself towards it with every fiber of my being, fiercely contending against the relentless waves that seemed intent on dragging me back into the abyssal void. When my feet finally made contact with the yielding sand, I collapsed, utterly exhausted and barely cognizant of my immediate surroundings. Upon regaining consciousness, the tempest had receded, and the sky above was pristinely clear. I was alive, yet my predicament remained acutely precarious. The island was small in its dimensions, circumscribed by towering cliffs and enveloped by a dense, impenetrable forest that stretched as far as my gaze could perceive. There were no discernible indications of human civilization. Only the boundless expanse of the sea lay behind me, and the enigmatic mystery of the forest awaited ahead. The initial days unfolded with a rudimentary survival regimen. I located a source of potable fresh water in a stream cascading down a slope, and I managed to gather some mussels from the shoreline rocks for sustenance. My mind remained singularly focused on the immediate imperatives: constructing a rudimentary shelter, procuring additional food, and preserving vital body heat. Yet beneath these pragmatic concerns, a persistent, disquieting sensation lingered that something was fundamentally amiss. During the profound stillness of the nights, an absolute silence reigned, yet I could not shake the feeling of being utterly alone. Occasionally, I believed I detected soft, almost imperceptible footsteps traversing the sand, or the faint snapping of branches within the dense forest. When I ventured out with my improvised flashlight, my beam illuminated nothing. I attempted to convince myself that these were merely the movements of indigenous animals, though an intrinsic awareness deep within me asserted the contrary. On the third day of my solitary confinement, I discovered the unequivocal first indicators that I was not, in fact, alone on the island. I was meticulously exploring the coastline, diligently searching for any potentially useful debris that might have been deposited ashore by the sea, when my eyes discerned the distinct imprints of footprints. They were unmistakably fresh, undeniably human in origin, and directed towards the interior expanse of the island. There was no room for doubt. Another presence resided here. My heart pounding with a frenetic rhythm, I arduously trekked deeper, following the discernible trail of footprints, The tracks eventually led to a small clearing where I encountered something entirely unexpected. A desolate, abandoned campsite. There was a tattered tent, the charred remnants of a past campfire, and an array of rusty utensils. Everything bore the hallmarks of having been left undisturbed for a considerable duration, perhaps even years. Yet the recentness of the footprints remained a perplexing contradiction. I meticulously searched for any signs that might reveal the identity of its former occupants, but nothing offered concrete answers. The pervasive sensation of being under constant surveillance intensified acutely. My instinct powerfully urged me to retreat to the beach, yet an inexplicable, compelling force compelled me to remain. That night I was abruptly jolted from my slumber by the sound of something in close proximity to my makeshift shelter. It was a subtle, almost ethereal sound, akin to the faint respiration of an unseen entity. I activated my improvised flashlight and directed its beam towards the entrance. There was no visible presence, yet an undeniable alteration had transpired in the ambient air. A distinct humidity not characteristic of the sea pervaded the space, accompanied by a peculiar metallic odor. The following morning I discovered distinct markings etched into the sand. They bore the appearance of rudimentary drawings, clumsily rendered strokes made with a stick, forming patterns I could not decipher but which imbued me with an inexplicable sense of dread. I resolved to conduct a more thorough exploration of the forest, desperately seeking answers or, at the very least, some clue regarding the identity of who or what resided there. I ascended a prominent hill that appeared to offer an encompassing panoramic vista of the island. Upon reaching the summit, I discerned the figure, another distinct shape positioned directly on the beach, precisely where my shelter was situated. It possessed a humanoid form, yet something in its posture seemed profoundly unnatural. It was hunched over, its gaze directed towards my rudimentary dwelling. Then, as if sensing my distant observation, it slowly raised its head and turned directly towards me. Although the distance precluded the discernment of intricate details, I knew with chilling certainty that our gazes had met. Without conscious thought, consumed by a storm of panic, I sprinted back towards the beach. Upon my arrival, the figure had vanished. Yet a new, unsettling arrangement stood directly in front of my shelter. A precise circle of stones with a strange, unfamiliar symbol prominently displayed in its center, eerily similar to the strokes I had observed earlier. The subsequent nights became an unmitigated torment. The unsettling sounds became more frequent. Distinct footsteps, low, guttural laughter that faded before I could pinpoint its origin, and whispers that seemed to emanate directly from the dense forest. Every desperate attempt to find rest was punctuated by the escalating sensation that something was relentlessly closing in. On the 6th day, I discovered a small boat, seemingly stranded within a concealed cove. It was heavily damaged, but crucially appeared to be repairable. It was my salvation. I dedicated the entire day to diligently working on it, utterly disregarding the encroaching fatigue and pervasive fear. My singular objective was to escape the island. On the final night, as I meticulously completed the adjustments to the boat, the sounds intensified and drew alarmingly closer. This time they were not subtle. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching from every conceivable direction. I did not wait to ascertain the source of these sounds. I propelled the boat into the water and rowed with every fiber of my being, leaving behind the beach, the island, and whatever malevolent entity had been stalking me. When I was eventually rescued, my voice was barely capable of articulation. No one afforded me credibility. They suggested I had likely experienced hallucinations brought on by the traumatic shipwreck and prolonged isolation. But I know with unwavering certainty what I witnessed and felt. Sometimes in the profound stillness of the night, those unsettling whispers still infiltrate my dreams, serving as a chilling reminder that I was never as isolated as I believed on that nameless island. And though I am no longer physically present there, I possess the persistent conviction that a part of that place has irrevocably remained with me. The days immediately following my rescue blurred into a confusing melange of profound relief and unsettling bewilderment. While my physical well-being was restored, my mind remained inextricably trapped within the confines of that island. Every minute detail was indelibly etched into my memory. The distinctive footprints, the enigmatic symbols inscribed in the sand, the hunched, unsettling figure on the beach. I endeavored to articulate my experiences to the men who had rescued me, but their responses were met only with expressions of profound disbelief. Isolation has peculiar effects on the human psyche. One of them, an aged mariner whose face was weathered by countless storms, remarked sagely, "Uninhabited islands possess their own insidious means of inducing madness, particularly when one is entirely alone," he continued. I desperately wished to believe him. I yearned to accept the logical rationalization that my desperate mind, overwhelmed by the crushing weight of loneliness and stress, had conjured these visions to fill a terrifying void. Yet there were undeniable elements I could not simply disregard. The symbols, the figure, and above all, the unsettling sounds. I returned to Seward and attempted to resume the rhythm of my former life, but something fundamental had irrevocably shifted. My small cabin, which had once served as a comforting refuge, now felt oppressively claustrophobic. The inherent tranquility of the coastline, which I had previously found so enjoyable, had transmuted into a perpetual source of anxiety. At night, every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind against the windows, caused me to relive those harrowing moments on the island. I began a fervent investigation. I desperately sought to comprehend the nature of what I had encountered, if indeed there was any discernible understanding to be had. I meticulously scoured the local library, interrogated other fishermen, and even engaged in conversation with a historian who was employed at a museum in Anchorage. I meticulously described the enigmatic symbols, endeavoring to maintain a semblance of sanity in my delivery. "Interesting," he murmured, stroking his beard thoughtfully while perusing the pages of a dusty tome. "The Tlingit and Haida tribes possess ancient narratives concerning islands that are not precisely what they appear to be. Places where the ethereal spirit of the forest or the sea relentlessly haunts those who are deemed unwelcome. That concept struck me with the force of an icy deluge. I had, in fact, been in one of those very places. Was that island something more profound than mere land and trees? Weeks transpired, yet the persistent sensation of being under constant observation refused to dissipate. One night, as I endeavored to drift into slumber, I detected something outside my cabin. It was not the familiar sounds of the wind or the rhythmic cadence of the waves. It was a whisper so faint that initially I convinced myself it was merely a product of my imagination. But then it recurred clearer this time. My very name was distinctly called. I leaped from my bed, seized a flashlight, and ventured onto the porch. The night was remarkably calm, the full moon illuminating the surrounding landscape. Yet the whisper persisted, seemingly moving amidst the trees as if the island itself had extended its ominous shadow to my very dwelling. The following day, I meticulously examined weather archives and regional maps. I was determined to pinpoint the island's exact location, even if only to reaffirm its existence and dispel the lingering doubt that my experience had been a mere hallucination. I dedicated hours to scrutinizing records but found nothing. The island did not appear on any known map. It was as if I had never set foot there. This defied all logical comprehension. I knew with absolute certainty that I had witnessed it, traversed its sands, and felt its profound silence. Frustrated beyond measure, I telephoned the captain of the vessel that had rescued me and inquired if he recalled the precise coordinates where he had found me. "Of course I remember," he stated cautiously. "But my friend, There was no island at the location where we discovered you. You were simply adrift, surrounded only by an endless expanse of water. That night, the dreams commenced. They were perpetually identical. I stood upon the beach, the gentle waves lapping at my feet. Directly before me stood the hunched figure, observing me motionlessly. But in these dreams, it was slowly advancing, employing an unnatural floating movement. I invariably awoke before it reached me, my heart racing uncontrollably and my sheets drenched in perspiration. Weeks transitioned into months, but the dreams persisted alongside my escalating obsession. Something did not reconcile. An inner voice persistently urged me that I had to return. Against all dictates of common sense, I commenced planning a return expedition to the Gulf. This time, I would be meticulously prepared, equipped with superior gear, a GPS device, multiple cameras, and ample provisions. I desperately required tangible proof, both for my own conviction and for the validation of others. Finally, in June, I returned to the sea utterly alone, having failed to persuade anyone to accompany me. The ocean's whisper had been replaced by a smaller vessel, but it proved sufficient for my daunting task. I navigated to various coordinates until my gaze finally discerned it. The island was undeniably there, precisely as it had been before, as if patiently awaiting my return. The landing proved different on this occasion. I was no longer a hapless castaway, but a deliberate explorer. I possessed the necessary instruments to meticulously document my discoveries, and the unwavering resolve to confront whatever entity had haunted my existence since my initial terrifying encounter. I traversed the beach towards the abandoned campsite, which was now even more deteriorated, almost completely reclaimed by the relentless forces of nature. The enigmatic symbols were still visibly etched into the sand, as if someone had recently inscribed them. But the most profound and unsettling revelations awaited within the forest's depths. As I advanced towards the clearing, the air grew palpably denser, heavier. The silence was not natural. It was an oppressive, suffocating stillness, as though the very island itself were holding its breath. I discovered additional markings inscribed upon the trees and more symbols meticulously carved into stones that formed a distinct circle upon the ground. In the precise center, something novel stood. A small totem meticulously carved from wood, featuring a figure that felt eerily familiar to me. It was the very figure I had witnessed on the beach. As I observed it, I perceived a distinct alteration in the atmosphere. I was no longer alone. I redirected my gaze towards the forest, and there it was, the hunched figure almost seamlessly blending with the surrounding shadows. This time, it did not vanish. It took a deliberate step forward, then another, until I could discern its features with undeniable clarity. It was unequivocally not human. Its body was slender, covered in a substance that resembled either moss or algae. Its face, if such a term could even be applied, possessed no defined features, merely a profound, dark void where eyes should have been. I have no recollection of how I managed to move, but I ran. I abandoned the totem, the clearing, everything. I reached the boat, swiftly engaged the engine, and plunged into the encompassing water. The figure did not pursue me, but the profound weight of its unsettling presence lingered with me throughout the entirety of my return journey. I never returned to that island, nor did I ever speak of it to anyone again. But since that harrowing experience, I harbor the persistent sensation that something indelible has remained with me. On quiet nights, I sometimes believe I detect that familiar whisper, calling my name from a distant ethereal realm. And when my gaze falls upon the water's surface, I perceive an entity watching me from the depths below, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to claim me. Story 3. I have always harbored an intense passion for hiking, and my residence in Alaska afforded me the unparalleled opportunity to traverse landscapes that seemed to have sprung directly from a vivid dream. The majestic Chugach Mountains held a particular allure for me. Their imposing snow-capped peaks and profound, sprawling valleys exuded an almost mystical quality. Consequently, when my friend Mark proposed a 3-day expedition to a seldom-traveled area within the park, I embraced the idea without a moment's hesitation. Our party consisted of 5 individuals in total. Mark, a botanist who perpetually carried a notebook to meticulously record any intriguing flora he encountered. Melissa, a retired military doctor who embraced hiking as a means to maintain her physical conditioning. Rob, also a retired military doctor who shared Melissa's enthusiasm for hiking and fitness. Julie, a talented photographer and avid extreme sports enthusiast. And myself, the most seasoned navigator within the group. Our plan was straightforward. We aimed to reach a secluded valley that none of us had previously explored, establish a camp for a couple of nights, and then retrace our steps to our initial starting point. Day 1 proved to be an impeccable beginning to our expedition. The day unfolded without any notable incidents. The air was invigoratingly fresh. The designated trails were clearly discernible, and a palpable sense of camaraderie pervaded the entire group. We meticulously set up our camp beside a flowing stream, beneath a pristinely clear sky that afforded a breathtaking, spectacular panorama of the Milky Way. It was an idyllic night, filled with genuine laughter and shared anecdotes. However, on the second day, circumstances began to deviate considerably from our plans. We commenced our ascent early, encountering terrain that proved to be steeper than our initial expectations. The indigenous vegetation grew increasingly dense, and the maps we relied upon did not precisely correspond to the stark reality of the landscape. By noon, we discovered ourselves positioned on a precipitous incline, with a sheer cliff offering a panoramic view overlooking a profound valley. It was at this juncture that Julie, who habitually maintained a slight lead, exclaimed with excited urgency, "You absolutely must behold this!" We swiftly converged to her location, and there discovered what appeared to be the veiled entrance to a hidden cave, concealed behind a cluster of dense bushes. It was sufficiently diminutive that we were compelled to crouch in order to enter, yet what immediately commanded our attention was the distinctive structural feature encircling it. Someone had meticulously constructed a frame of stones around the entrance, as if to denote its significance or provide it with protection. "This is not indicated on any of our maps," I remarked, meticulously inspecting the stones. They were adorned with moss and lichen, yet they did not appear to possess the antiquity one would anticipate in such a remote locale. "What do you surmise lies within?" Rob inquired. "Perhaps an ancient shelter," Melissa posited. "Or a bear's den. We ought to exercise caution." Mark, however, was resolute in his determination to explore. He had consistently been the most audacious member of our group, and this instance was no exception. He extracted his flashlight and, without the slightest hesitation, began to stoop and proceed inward. "If anything of interest presents itself, shout it out," I half-jokingly called to him. A few minutes elapsed before his voice emanated from within. "It's immense in here. You absolutely have to witness this." I found myself unable to resist the compelling urge. We securely tethered our backpacks to a nearby tree, retrieved our flashlights, and followed him into the cave's unknown depths. The cavern opened into a space of significantly greater proportions than its external appearance suggested. The walls were coated in a lustrous mineral that mirrored the light, creating a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic visual effect. "This is truly incredible," Julie whispered, incessantly capturing photographs as we advanced. The ambient air grew palpably cooler and denser, and a peculiar, unsettling odor pervaded the space, something distinctly metallic and damp that I was unable to identify. Soon we uncovered the initial unequivocal sign that we were not, in fact, alone within this subterranean realm. Approximately 20 meters from the entrance, our gaze fell upon something lying on the ground. A meticulously arranged circle of rocks with discernible remnants of ash in its center. It bore the appearance of a fire pit, yet something was undeniably anomalous. The rocks bore intricately carved symbols, none of which any of us recognized. They comprised lines and curves that seemed to coalesce into distinct patterns, yet the more intently one scrutinized them, the more profoundly unsettling they became. "What in the name of hell is this?" Rob questioned, his voice laced with apprehension. "Examine it closely," Melissa suggested. "Perhaps an indigenous ritual." Her tone, however, lacked genuine conviction. Mark predictably expressed a strong desire to continue our exploration. Although a part of me yearned to turn back immediately, an inexplicable force compelled me to venture further inward. A few meters deeper, we discovered what appeared to be an opening in the ground, a profound pit descending far beyond the illuminating reach of our flashlights. From this abyss, a sound began to emanate, a faint murmur, almost imperceptible, as if an unseen entity were whispering from its profound depths. "Do you perceive that?" Julie inquired, directing her flashlight into the pit. "It's probably just the wind reverberating," Rob asserted, though his tone sounded more like a desperate attempt to reassure himself. Mark, impetuous as ever, retrieved a stone and cast it into the pit. We all listened in profound silence, anticipating the distinctive sound of the rock impacting the bottom, but it never materialized. Instead, the murmur intensified, growing perceptibly louder. Melissa instinctively recoiled a step. "This is not normal," she declared, her voice betraying a distinct tremor, the first unmistakable sign of fear she had exhibited during the entirety of the expedition. I attempted to soothe the growing apprehension within the group. "There are likely air currents below," I ventured. "That adequately explains the sound." But then our flashlights began to falter. First Julie's, then Melissa's, and finally my own. Profound darkness enveloped us like an oppressive shroud, and with its descent something else manifested. The murmur transformed into discernible words, though we could not comprehend their meaning. They were undeniably present, encircling us, completely filling the expansive space. It was a cacophonous chorus of voices, some possessing deep resonance, others high-pitched, all layered into an incomprehensible, unearthly chant. Melissa shrieked. Something moved within the impenetrable darkness. We did not visually perceive anything, yet we distinctly felt a presence that was almost tangible. The air grew frigid and a chilling wind began to surge from the pit, bearing with it a nauseating smell of decay that churned our stomachs. "Let's get out of here," Rob bellowed, and no one offered any argument. We sprinted towards the entrance, stumbling blindly and colliding with unseen obstacles until we finally burst into the welcome embrace of daylight. The nightmare, however, did not conclude with our escape. Upon our return to the camp, we discovered that our backpacks had been thoroughly rummaged through. Melissa's tent was utterly destroyed, and encircling our camp we found the identical carved symbols we had initially observed on the rocks inside the cave. That night, none of us could find solace in sleep. The voices persisted, whispering incessantly within the trees, carried by the wind and even resonating within the water of the nearby stream. At dawn, we collectively resolved to abandon the expedition and initiate our return to the starting point. We spoke little during the arduous journey back. No one seemed willing to openly acknowledge the terrifying events that had transpired. Years have elapsed since that day, but the voices have never truly departed from me. I perceive them during moments of profound silence, as if they are persistently calling to me. And occasionally, in the encroaching darkness, I witness fleeting flashes of light that serve as an ominous reminder of the cave walls. I possess no clear understanding of what unspeakable entity we unearthed within the Chugach Mountains, but one truth remains unequivocally certain. We should have never dared to enter that place. The days immediately following our return were a disorienting blur of profound confusion and pervasive paranoia. Each of us pursued our separate paths, desperately attempting to suppress the memory of what we had discovered within that treacherous cave. Yet obliterating such a profound experience is not an easy feat, particularly when you are gripped by the unsettling sensation that you have not, in fact, left it behind. It began with the dreams. Every night as I succumbed to slumber, I found myself transported back into the chilling confines of that cave. In my dreams, the pit extended into an infinite abyss, and the voices became starkly clear, articulating my name in a cold, distant tone. Each desperate attempt to awaken was met with the harrowing sensation that something unseen and invisible was relentlessly pulling me down into that unfathomable darkness. I endeavored to converse with Mark about my experiences, but the encounter proved disastrous. Upon my arrival at his residence, I found him in a state of visible perturbation. He had systematically removed every mirror from his walls and meticulously sealed his windows with aluminum foil. He appeared utterly exhausted, as if he had not known sleep for an indeterminate number of days. "You should not have come," were the first words he uttered from the doorway. "Mark, we need to speak." "Since our return, something is fundamentally amiss," I implored. He emitted a bitter, nervous laugh. "Not right? It's unequivocally clear something isn't right. You heard it. You witnessed it. That place, that entity. It marked us," he asserted. I attempted to elicit further explanation from him, but each time he attempted to articulate details concerning the cave, his words devolved into incoherence. All I could ascertain was that he, too, had been plagued by dreams, though his were demonstrably more terrifying. "In my dreams," he confessed, his body trembling, "I don't merely hear the voices, I perceive things. Shadows, they are perpetually watching me. They are always watching me." That conversation marked the final time I spoke with Mark. 2 days later, I received a distressing call from Melissa. She informed me that Mark had disappeared. His door had been left ajar, but there were no discernible signs of a struggle. Only a distinct trail of damp earth led from his living room to the exterior. That night, sleep remained an elusive comfort. I remained seated in my living room with every light illuminated, awaiting the manifestation of something I could not name. It was then that I detected the faint sound of a whisper, barely audible yet undeniably present, emanating from my bedroom. Returning to the cave, the following morning I sought out the others. I located Melissa within her laboratory, surrounded by towering stacks of books and countless plant samples. She had become consumed by the study of the mysterious symbols we had encountered on the stones. She presented me with numerous pages of notes meticulously filled with intricate drawings and complex theories. "According to my extensive research," Melissa explained, "the symbols bear no resemblance to anything known to humanity, yet they appear to be deliberately designed to contain something. Something we inadvertently released when we trespassed into the cave." "Released?" I inquired, a palpable knot forming in my stomach. "Consider it a barrier, a containment field, a cage," she elaborated. "When we entered and disrupted the circle of stones, we effectively broke the ancient seal. Now, whatever it is here, and it has no intention of permitting us to escape." I attempted to establish contact with Julie and Rob, but both remained unresponsive. Julie did not answer my repeated calls, and Rob, according to an acquaintance, had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital following a violent episode at his residence. The final return. Driven by an unwavering resolve to halt whatever entity was relentlessly pursuing us, I made the perilous decision to return to the cave. I acknowledged the inherent madness of such an undertaking, yet I felt I possessed no alternative. If that entity was indeed after us, and if it had escaped confinement because of our intrusion, then perhaps a return to its origin could potentially halt its malevolent influence. I managed to persuade Melissa to accompany me despite her evident reluctance. We arrived at the site precisely at sunset, just as the last vestiges of daylight began to recede among the trees. The entrance to the cave remained, yet a disturbing transformation had occurred. The surrounding vegetation was utterly devoid of life, as if some unseen force had completely drained its vitality from the area. The stone frame encircling the entrance was now covered in new, intricate symbols, far more complex and darker than those we had observed before. "This wasn't here previously. This wasn't here before," Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible as she activated her flashlight. We proceeded cautiously inward, our hearts pounding so violently that I could barely perceive the sound of my own footsteps. The air within the cave was colder than during our previous visit, and the unsettling murmur was immediately present, as if it had never truly ceased. We reached the pit, which now appeared even larger and deeper than I remembered. Around its edges, the symbols were deeply etched into the rock, but they were not static. They seemed to subtly move, perpetually shifting their forms before our very eyes. "This is not a natural phenomenon," Melissa declared, directing her flashlight towards the abyss. Before she could articulate another word, the murmur transmuted into a deafening scream, and a violent gust of wind erupted from the pit, violently propelling both of us to the ground. In that petrifying moment, I witnessed it. I am incapable of fully describing it, for my mind simply cannot process the true nature of what it was. It possessed no fixed, discernible shape, merely a swirling mass of shadows and a multitude of eyes that appeared to multiply and vanish simultaneously. Melissa cried out something, but her words were lost to my perception. My entire being was consumed by the terrifying presence of that entity, which was now inexorably crawling towards us, as if the pit could no longer contain its boundless form. I possess no clear recollection of how we managed to extricate ourselves from that nightmare. I only know that when I regained consciousness, I was outside the cave with Melissa lying unconscious beside me, but unequivocally alive. The entrance had been inexplicably sealed, as if it had never existed in the first place. Living with the haunting. Months have elapsed since that fateful day, but the voices continue to relentlessly pursue me. I do not know how much longer I can endure their ceaseless torment. Sometimes I contemplate whether we truly escaped, or if the cave merely permitted us to leave, knowing full well that we are incapable of escaping the indelible burden we now carry within us. Story 4. When the global pandemic unequivocally struck with devastating force, I made the resolute decision that the most prudent course of action was to abandon the bustling confines of the city. My motivation was not solely driven by the pervasive fear of the insidious virus, but also by the sheer overwhelming chaos that had engulfed urban life. Throngs of people crowding retail establishments, omnipresent patrols, a palpable sense of widespread unrest. I simply could no longer tolerate the oppressive atmosphere. My grandfather possessed an abandoned ranch nestled deep within the mountains of Oaxaca, a secluded haven situated quite literally in the middle of nowhere, offering ample space for profound isolation and complete detachment from the wider world. I could scarcely recall the last time I had visited the property, but as soon as the opportune moment presented itself, I meticulously packed my belongings and drove southward, desperately seeking a sanctuary where I could rediscover a semblance of peace. The ranch itself was in a lamentable state of disrepair. The main house, constructed of resilient stone and weathered wood, still stood, yet its windows were shattered and its roof was in imminent danger of collapse. Even in its dilapidated condition, it proved sufficient for my immediate needs. I harbored no desire for luxury, merely a secluded retreat where I could conceal myself until the tumultuous external world subsided. On my second day, while meticulously exploring the immediate environs, I stumbled upon something I had no recollection of ever seeing before. Situated near a gentle hill, there was a substantial metal door, seamlessly embedded within the very ground. It was large, heavily corroded by years of neglect, and almost entirely obscured by an overgrowth of weeds, clearly indicating its long-standing presence. My inherent curiosity was instantly piqued. My grandfather had never once alluded to anything resembling this, and as a child, my attention had been too fleeting to register such intricate details during my visits. It required a couple of strenuous hours for me to meticulously clear the surrounding area. The door proved to be remarkably well sealed, as though it had been securely locked from the interior. Initially, I speculated it might be some form of storage facility, perhaps a shelter dating back to the Revolutionary era, or even a hidden cache my grandfather utilized to store various supplies. What I knew with absolute certainty was that I was compelled to open it. I located an antiquated iron bar within the house, and after several arduous attempts, I finally managed to pry it open. The heavy door emitted a loud, grating creak, releasing a pungent stench of pervasive dampness and rust. A chilling sensation traversed my spine as I cautiously peered inside, discerning a flight of concrete stairs descending into an abyss of impenetrable darkness. I retrieved my flashlight from my survival kit and began my descent. The tunnel was narrow, its walls rough and unhewn, and its ceiling remarkably low. The air was thick with humidity, and the rhythmic sound of dripping water echoed from some distant, unseen point, while the atmosphere grew increasingly dense, heavy with a musty, earthy odor. After traversing a few meters, I reached a larger subterranean chamber. The expansive space was filled with an assortment of ancient objects, decayed furniture, meticulously stacked wooden boxes, and various rusted tools that appeared to have been last utilized a considerable time ago. Everything within the chamber suggested that this location had been actively occupied at some point in the distant past. What most profoundly captivated my attention was a peculiar table situated in the center of the room, entirely covered with scattered papers, photographs, and notebooks, all coated in a fine, pervasive layer of dust. Upon closer inspection, I observed that the papers were filled with strange, indecipherable handwritten notes, cryptic in nature, replete with enigmatic symbols and lines of writing I could not comprehend, as though someone had been fervently attempting to decipher a profound mystery. One particular photograph conspicuously stood out from the scattered pile. It depicted a group of individuals in black and white, numbering at least 6, perhaps 7, standing solemnly in front of the entrance to the shelter. Their faces bore serious, unsmiling expressions, as though they were patiently awaiting some momentous event. But the most unsettling detail was situated in the background, almost imperceptible. A blurry, diminutive, deformed silhouette, something that unequivocally did not belong. I swiftly set the photograph aside and continued my search, but the profound discomfort had already taken root within me. My flashlight began to flicker erratically, and the sound of my own agitated breathing seemed to amplify, filling the oppressive silence. I resolved that I had spent a sufficient amount of time underground. As I was carefully closing the heavy metal door, I was overcome by the unsettling sensation that something was fundamentally amiss. Over the subsequent days, I diligently attempted to dismiss the peculiar feeling of being perpetually watched. I continued my exploration of the expansive ranch and its surroundings, yet I could not dislodge the disturbing image of what I had glimpsed in that photograph. As night descended, the pervasive feeling grew significantly worse. Every creak emanating from the aged wood, every gust of wind against the venerable structure felt as though an unseen entity was present, meticulously observing from the profound darkness. On the 4th night, as I prepared for sleep, I detected something outside. It was footsteps, yet they did not possess the cadence of human movement. They were remarkably light, swift, and moved with a strange, unsettling rhythm. I remained absolutely still, listening intently from my bed, patiently awaiting their eventual passing. But they did not. Instead, the footsteps appeared to approach the very door of the house, as though something was deliberately prowling around the premises. I arose, seizing my flashlight and a machete I had discovered in one of the barn's dusty boxes. I stepped onto the porch and directed the beam of light around the ranch. The property was enveloped in profound silence. The footsteps had ceased, yet I could still distinctly perceive that unsettling presence, that palpable tension permeating the air. Suddenly, my gaze caught something moving at the very edge of my vision amidst the trees, a swift, fleeting shadow that vanished in the mere blink of an eye. My breath quickened dramatically. I knew with absolute certainty that something was profoundly wrong. That night, sleep utterly eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I detected whispers. Initially, I attributed them to the mere sound of the wind rustling through the trees, but these were unequivocally voices whispering words I could not comprehend. The hours slowly crawled by, and when the sun finally began its ascent, I knew I had to uncover the truth of what was transpiring. I returned to the underground shelter, this time considerably better prepared. My backpack contained a supply of water, provisions, and several additional flashlights. Upon re-entering the main chamber, I noticed something I had overlooked before. In one of the corners, there was a concealed passage obscured by a stack of boxes. I followed it deeper and deeper into the earth until I arrived at a smaller, more confined room. On the floor, there were peculiar marks, as if something substantial had been dragging itself around the space. My eyes fixed upon a small metal door, conspicuously newer than the rest of the shelter. It was securely fastened with a thick, heavy chain. There was no doubt something was locked behind that door. Suddenly, I detected a noise behind me, as if an unseen entity was slowly shifting. I swiftly turned my flashlight, and what I had been relentlessly pursued by in my dreams stood directly before me. They were diminutive beings possessing pale, thin skin and long, grotesquely twisted limbs. Their eyes were disproportionately large and intensely black, as though they had evolved specifically to thrive in absolute darkness. They stood there, observing me in profound silence, slowly moving in my direction. I sprinted towards the stairs, the sound of their light, quick footsteps echoing ominously behind me. I made it outside and violently slammed the metal door shut, securing it firmly with a piece of wood. I returned to the ranch, but the property no longer offered me any semblance of refuge. That night, I heard them once more, circling persistently outside, patiently awaiting an opportune moment for me to lower my guard. At dawn, I packed my essential belongings and departed, leaving behind the mountains and the ranch without a single backward glance. I never definitively ascertained the precise nature of those beings or their purpose for being there. The sole certainty I possess is that they were unequivocally not human, and that the underground shelter had served as their true home long before my unexpected arrival. By